This is the second lecture for chapter 16 and 17, and we'll start off here looking at OPEC. OPEC is an organization of about 11 countries, most of them in the Middle East, that typically agree on the outputs of the amount of oil. And you can see the vast amount of oil, 78%, comes from these particular countries. Of the 11 countries, Saudi Arabia, which is known to have a lot of oil, but the second one on there, interesting, Venezuela has a roughly equal, if not a little bit more oil as far as proven and thought of as being unproven reserves. Yet it's interesting just as far as how they function money-wise. Venezuela, of course, has multiple problems economically and politically. Okay. This is looking at how the fluctuation of oil, how the price has changed considerably over the last 30 some odd years. And you can see for the long time in the 90s, relatively the price of both crude and for a barrel, and for just $1 per gallon was relatively low, under $2 for a gallon of gas. And then in the 2000s, you see we had that huge spike when we had that recession, like 2008. It went up to $4 or so a gallon, or really close as far as in the Michigan area. But for the last 10 some odd years, it's been relatively right around $3 to $3.50 a gallon. We did have a dip in the last so many odd years, but you can see on this chart here, it does go back up, as is today in 2022. We're back around $3.25 to $3.50 a gallon. And that's probably, for the foreseeable future where it will go because of just the supply. The idea of thinking that we're ever going to have cheap gas again, realistically just isn't there, just because, again, of the supply. This is looking at our economy, our fuel economy for a variety of different vehicles. You can see for the last 50 years or so. Looking on there, you can see how much it's changed in regards to the production, the type of vehicles that we use, and then the miles per gallon. So you can see we very much have shifted away from cars or sedans over to a variety of different kind of vehicles, but trucks and SUVs, pickups and such. And then just based on the mileage for these things, they've mostly all increased, except with the exception of pickup trucks. But the mileage is still nothing to get too terribly excited about. We can do much better on this mileage. So they're all relatively low. Looking at the supply, you can see how, as far as users of oil, the U.S. is the largest user of oil. China would be very close to that as well. But we don't have that much as far as proven supply. We pump out a whole lot. We have in the last so many odd years, but as far as proven oil reserves, we still have a relatively low amount of oil comparatively to the rest of the world. And this is something as far as the peak oil. We'll talk about that going forward, but we peaked as far as our production back in 1974. This is what I was referring to on the previous slide. The Hubert curve is the idea or the concept of you never used oil and then you keep extracting it, and eventually you will peak out in your production, and then from that point on, year after year, you will always produce less and less oil. So this is a curve based on that for various parts of the world. And you can see how, whether, they vary a little bit from year to year, but the overall trend you see playing out. And the part that we really want to draw our eye to is it's going down continuously. So even you look over to 2050, you can see that it is markedly going down. And this is a reason or a concern that we need to be looking at: one, efficiency, and two, alternatives. Because as far as these liquid fossil fuels, petroleum goes, it's just not going to last forever. It is a finite resource, and we have to figure out something else. So again, looking at this, doesn't matter how you want to say it, it's We said 2050, we would still have it, but again, the cost of it is going to be relatively high, and it's just not going to be economical to use it. Yes, it's still going to be around, but you also have to think that we want to use this oil for other things. Plastics, there's a variety of different things that we use oil for. Fertilizers, plastics, cosmetics, medicines. There's a lot of different things we use petroleum for other than moving cars around. Looking at coal, you can see we have a whole bunch of that, 200 plus years. And again, that's nothing to get too terribly excited about. 200 years is not that long a time relative. But again, it has another issue with it, which is the climate change potential. This is some of these other sources of petroleum. These are those tar sands that we have referred to in an earlier chapter. And a lot of these can be found in Canada, Canadian tar sands. And you can see some of the potential problems that they have, that they're just not clean. And there's a lot of cost and materials that are needed to extract the things you want from the potential pollutants that are in them as well. Oil shales, this is oil that is trapped in rock. Usually it's like a sandstone material. And you can see that it's, again, not cheap oil. It requires a lot of inputs to get the material, in this case kerogen, out of the rock formation. Natural gas is something that has been quite helpful in regards to a transition away from petroleum or crude oil. Usually it's found in the same formations, like as we showed in that slide very early on. It is usually less dense and found floating above the crude oil. And you can see, you know, who has it. Russia and Iran possess a great deal of this. The United States has a lot of this as well. It is better than crude oil because it doesn't have the same amount of contaminants per kilowatt hour or energy unit. It is going to have less CO2 in comparison. Coal, something we've talked a bit about, looking as far as its evolution, how oil or coal is formed. A very low grade coal type material is peat, but is very early on in the evolutionary process. And if you push this along over thousands, potentially millions of years, eventually you get a material which we had in class called anthracite, in which it's really much a high carbon material where the sulfur content is quite low. The vast majority of material we use is that bituminous, which is the third from the right. And this just kind of goes through the formation that you would have over a long period of time. But notice, as far as the foundation or the original source of this, is going to be like a swampy location in which we have a lot of organic material. The areas, again, that have a lot of coal, and a lot of it is just based on their size, and then being more in a northern type location on the globe, the US, Russia, and China have a lot of coal, So as far as running out of energy, that's not going to be a problem in the foreseeable future. If you needed energy, we have a lot. Consumers, you can see those listed there. But again, the problems which we've discussed in good detail is that CO2. This is consumption, and you can see how it, since even the 80s, the consumption has definitely gone up all around the world. But a lot of the push on that is what you see with China. So that's overall world consumption. But everybody, if you average everybody outside of China together, it's gone down. But because of China's economic growth and their energy needs, the overall world, it's actually, well, I should say it's actually gone down a little bit, as you can see on that OECD line. I'm not going to try to quote it off because I'll get part of it wrong. But that's a variety of countries together and their total usage. So you can see they've all kind of gone down with the exception of China. That's the big takeaway. this idea of synthetic natural gas, it is something that can happen, and it makes the energy transportable more easily as opposed to putting it on rail cars. Synthetic natural gas. The problem again is you are making a conversion, and it is both energy and money consumption. But you do have this way of transporting the energy through a pipeline as opposed to putting it on a rail car and moving it around. So SNG is a phrase you may see occasionally, even out on the road, if it is being pushed around by a truck. But that's rarely happens. Usually it's by a pipeline. All right, this is a good place to take a break, and we'll pick it up with lecture number 3.